Hello everyone. Thank you for visiting my channel, SKTV's Well-Informed Japan Viewpoint. This time, the video is about, why are Koreans boycotting Japanese products now? It has been more than 100 days, since Koreans started boycotting Japanese products, under the slogan of No Japan, I'm not buying and I'm not going in early July. In the past, there have been a number of boycotts against Japanese products. And most of them ended up with short-term formal performances. But this time, it seems very systematic, continuous, and extensive. And it's quite different from the past. Many foreign people, who are interested in Korea, might be curious about it. So I want to talk about my personal opinions, as a Korean. For many foreign friends in the world, I made the same videos with 4 different language versions: English, Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. I hope it will help you understand the situation in Korea, in a little bit more details. First of all, the direct trigger of the boycott is Japan's export regulation of semiconductor and display materials, which is most fatal factor for Korea's export industry. The Japanese government announced that it's due to security reasons. But most Koreans believe that the real reason for the export regulation is Korean Supreme Court's final ruling on compensation for 4 forced laborers in Japanese colonial periods on October 30, 2018. The lawsuit began in February 2005, but due to various political and diplomatic changes, the final ruling was made by the Supreme Court in October 2018. Unfortunately, as of the Supreme Court's final ruling date, 3 out of the 4 plaintiffs have already died, only 1 survived. In 2012, the accused Japanese company expressed their intention to follow Korea's Supreme Court ruling in connection with the lawsuit. But later said, the compensation issue was settled under the 1965 Korea-Japan Basic Treaty. It appears to comply with the Japanese government's guidelines. The Abe administration's basic policy is that all responsibility for Korea during the colonial period, including compensation for forced laborers, was settled by the signing of the 1965 Korea-Japan Basic Treaty. Therefore, the Japanese government cannot recognize the Korean Supreme Court's ruling, and continues to demand that the Korean government restore the ruling. In this regard, the Korean government said, as a 3-power separation country, it is impossible for the administration to interfere with the judiciary's ruling. And the lawsuits filed against individual companies have nothing to do with the 1965 Basic Treaty between Korea and Japan, which have been recognized internationally. As the Korean government continued to reject the Japanese government's demands. In early July, in order to subdue the Korean government, the Japanese government used its superior position in basic chemicals sector to regulate exports of chemicals that could deal a fatal blow to Korea's high-tech export industry. This reminded the Korean people of Japan's invasion in the late 16th century and early 20th century, and at the same time, regarded it as Japan's economic invasion in the 21st century. In particular, the Abe administration's shift of diplomatic issues to economic retaliation has angered the Korean people a lot. In response to the Japanese government's economic retaliation, some netizens voluntarily created the No Japan slogan and launched a boycott of Japanese products in a campaign to ban travel to Japan. Then, in a flash, it's been spread out to almost the entire nation through social networking sites. And a lot of people joined. During the boycott of Japanese products, many Koreans realized that Korea have never had a trade surplus with Japan since Korea established diplomatic relations in 1965. In addition, Japanese products in Korea are very deep in Korean life. While the Japanese people have been completely reluctant to buy the Korean products intentionally, even though Korea's products, such as cars, home appliances, and smartphones record huge sales in the global market. As an extreme example, Korean cars have been sold quite a lot in the US and Europe. But only a few dozen Korean cars were sold in Japan last year. while Japanese cars have been sold nearly 50,000 units in the Korean market. In addition, Samsung Electronics smartphones are the world's leading smartphones along with Apple's iPhone. But the Japanese market needs to remove Samsung Electronics logo to be sold. This is a serious example of Korean hate activities. The boycott will be influenced by the diplomatic dialogue between Korea and Japan in the future. But due to the change in Koreans' perception of Japan, it's going to be a long-term and continuous process, unlike the past. The biggest problem between Korea and Japan is the difference in the perception of history in the past. And especially it's a reality that Korea and Japan are interpreting historical facts from the late 19th century to the mid-20th century in the opposite way. In Japan, since the inauguration of the Abe's administration, they have kept trying to revise its pacifist constitution, in order to move toward a war-prone country. And there have many symptoms for the Abe administration to return Japan to the totalitarian and militaristic system of the Japanese imperial era. I'm so afraid that, sooner or later, the whole of Japan might become an ultra-rightist society. Occasionally, differences in perceptions of history have negatively affected diplomatic relations between Korea and Japan, and have become serious when the progressive forces of Korea, with their progressive viewpoint of history, took power. Now, it's the time that the gap in the recognition of the past history between Korean and Japan proved to be biggest. The difference in deep-rooted perceptions of this past history is now quite large and unfortunate. If the present generation cannot solve it, the future generations will eventually have to walk the same way as they do now. The fundamental reason why Korea and Japan have long been called as the near and distant countries is also the difference in perception of history. I hope that the current political forces of both countries will consult with each other in order to narrow their historical perceptions. Now it is in the worst state since the normalization of diplomatic ties between South Korea and Japan in 1965. I will end this video with the hope that Korea-Japan relations will be normalized as soon as possible. If you liked the video, please press subscribe and like. Thanks for watching.